There were rooms that were quiet, but still very crowded. So many memories, so suffocating. So much so that even a sigh from myself makes me want to cry. This afternoon, I returned to that room. The same old electrical outlet, the same chair by the window, the same wall clock that stopped running last year when the last person left. Silence. So quiet I could hear my hair fall. Fulcanelli once said, "The tomb is not a place of death. It is a place where the soul is placed to begin its transformation." I didn't understand that sentence until I lived alone among 4 white walls, and the shadows were no longer present. When children grow up, they drift away, like stars leaving their constellations. When your spouse dies, you lose more than just a person. You lose the sounds that once filled the space, and then one day, the door closes. No one comes in anymore. No one needs to call you. No one asks, "Have you eaten? Have you slept? Does it still hurt?" Only the sound of the TV and the sound of my heart. No one listens. This room, for others, may be just a place to rest. But for me, it is a crypta, a place sealed by absence, and waiting for an alchemy to take place with materials no one taught it nostalgia, emptiness, and silence. I used to think loneliness is a state, but now I see it is a laboratory. No one is teaching beside you. No one is mixing chemicals, just you, yourself, and a salty feeling like seawater rising from your heart. Classical alchemy called this stage solutio, when everything that was once solid begins to melt, like metal being immersed in liquid to dissolve its layers, like the soul being dissolved to reveal the pure essence within. This room, to me, is that giant basin of solution. Everything that was once solid now turns to water. There is nothing to hold on to. There is only flow, flowing from the towel that someone once hung neatly, flowing from the slippers that were once placed close together by the bed, flowing from the remote control that was still in its original place, but no one pressed it anymore. I turned on the TV, not to watch, but to hear people talking. I turned on YouTube, not to study, just to not hear my heart that had been silent for too long. I talked to the cat, alone, not expecting an answer, just hoping that I could still hear my own voice echoing in some space. Someone said, "Loneliness is when you have no one by your side." I don't think so. True loneliness is when you still have all the memories, but no one to confirm that they were ever real. No one remembers how you sang. No one remembers the meals you cooked. No one knows how warm your hands felt on someone else's forehead. Everything is still there, but no one calls names anymore, and you start doubting yourself. You ask, have I really lived? But at that moment, something very faintly vibrated in my heart, a sound that did not come from outside. Not from the TV, not from the cat, not from the sound. It came from within this silent room. It was like someone was tapping my palm, not to shake me, but to remind me, this is not a death room. This is a beginning, a transformation, a spiritual practice. I used to close the door and think I was withdrawing from the world. Now I know I am entering the sacred furnace, a space that no one sees but is very real, where I am. No more role, no more duty, only the self that is being renewed through dissolution. The silence in the room is not killing me. It is fermenting, slowly, silently, so that one day I will no longer be the one left behind, but the one newly born from within. Fulcanelli once wrote, "The space beneath the church, what people call the tomb, is actually where light is distilled. It is where the old elements are not buried, but separated and recombined." The first time I read that, I didn't understand. I was too young, and frankly, too in a hurry to hear someone speak of death in such a gentle voice. But in recent years, when the door to my house closed, when the sounds of children were only in memory, and the bowl of rice grew cold on the table untouched, I began to understand. The room I'm sitting in is not the end. It is crypta, not where people die, but where the light goes down. Not to be extinguished, but to be reformed. In ancient times, when alchemists built alchemy towers, they always dug a basement underneath. Not to hide anything, not to hide the body, but to have a space of absolute silence, where the breath of the soul can rise to the surface. I started calling my room crypta, not in a formal way, but as a way to address the spirit. This is no longer the living room, where there used to be laughter, guests, and tet jams. This is no longer the bedroom, where there used to be snoring, tossing and turning, and calls for breakfast. Now, it is a meditation room. Fulcanelli believes that every empty room contains unnamed energy, a kind of energy that only comes out when the living do nothing. No organizing, no cleaning, no pretending to be okay. Sit, listen, and let the old stuff evaporate from you. The soul, no longer imprisoned by role, will begin to speak. I don't know if you've ever been in an ancient crypt. I was there the year I studied alchemical literature in Florence. I entered the crypt of the Church of San Miniato. Stone walls, no electricity, just a few candles burning low. No one spoke, but I heard myself. Not the sound of a heartbeat, not the sound of footsteps, but the sound of my true self emerging in the darkness. Now I understand why, when people get old, they return to an empty room. Not because I ran out of options, but because it was finally time to step into my own inner basement. And if we are brave enough, that room will not break us. It will separate itself, like fire separates wine from its dregs, leaving behind a crystal of the soul. The alchemists called it essentia, the essence, formless, nameless, ageless. Regardless of who calls it, I used to be afraid of going home early. Afraid of the evenings with only myself and the white wall. Afraid of my own shadow falling down the hallway. But now, I learned to sit as the ancients sat in crypta, without fear, without expectation, just witness. And I began to see the light was not on the ceiling. It was coming from the ground. Fulcanelli said the tomb was not made to contain the dead, but to filter out the life that remains after the form no longer exists. We think that when we are left alone, we are being withdrawn from life. But actually, it's when the soul is pulled away from the noise. To know what I have left, not the pain, not the memories, not the identity, but the light flowing back. I dare not say I have transformed, but I know I no longer avoid the silence of this room. I call its name. I thank it. I settle with it. And from deep in the darkness, I began to hear a whisper. Every great light was once kept in a cellar. I used to close the door of my room because I thought I was alone. Now I close the door so the light inside me won't be blown out by the wind. Alchemists call this stage solutio. It is not a flood, not a deluge, but a voluntary process of dissolution. A metal, after being heated to remove impurities, must be dropped into water. Don't let it cool. Let it reform. I am not metal, but some days I find myself melting into seemingly harmless things, an old song, an unworn shirt, a spoon left in a drawer, a remote control no one fights over. Every day, living alone is like a drop of water seeping into the skin. No pain, but moist, wet from the inside. I used to try to keep things dry. I turned on the TV, not to watch, but to make noise, as if an unfamiliar voice could save me from the watery silence. I talked to the cat, not to have a conversation, just to know I still have sounds to make. I paced back and forth, pouring water into glasses, opening and closing drawers, all in a dance against sinking. But one day, I couldn't resist anymore. I let the water rise. Not outside, but inside. I turned on the TV, and then off. I sat down, not to check my messages, just to listen to the sound of water dripping inside me. A sound of water that no one taught me to name, but I know it's a feeling. Fulcanelli once said, "Nothing is ever formed unless it has been dissolved in water. And no soul is ever strong unless it has been melted." Loneliness is not when you are left behind, but when all the layers that once attached you to others have melted away from you like salt in water. You were once a mother, once a wife, once the one who was called every morning, once the laughter at the dinner table, once the shoulder for someone to lean on, and then each of those roles faded away. No one said. No one apologized. Just you, and a glass of salty water in your heart that you still don't dare to drink. Solutio is the stage where the soul drinks its own pain without vomiting it, without denying it, without sweetening it with empty positive words. I drank. I let the tears fall without wiping them away. I admitted. Yes, I am sad. Not because I am weak, but because I am real. There are times when I feel like I'm melting into the tiles beneath my feet. But at that moment, I felt more clearly than ever that I was present. Because when we dissolve, we don't disappear. We just return to our original form. The empty room in the solutio is where the soul lightens layer by layer. No need for witnesses. No need for conclusions. Just be water. Water knows how to go down without breaking. It seeps into every crack of the heart that has for many years kept a strong mask. Water did not argue. It accepted. I learned that when there was no one left to pretend to be, no eyes left to prove I was okay, just me, and the mirror no one looks at. I look at it and don't ask. Why am I like this? I just said. That's fine. I'm water. Today, I'm not rock. I no longer needed to struggle to survive. I learned to let the water carry me away toward another self, not hard, not sharp, just me, flowing. There are afternoons. I rummage through old drawers, not to find things, but to find myself. I flipped through each photo, my hands shaking slightly. Not because of old age, but because of the distance between me and the people in the photos. even though they all bore my name. Have I ever laughed like that? Have I ever held someone's hand that warmly? The photos say nothing. They don't blame me for forgetting, nor do they ask me to remember. They just lie there, silent as ancient stones. But I know, in each photo is a layer of time melting. Fulcanelli writes, "A photograph is not a form, but a vibration of a real moment." When we look back with a clear mind, we don't just see the image. We hear the soul. I started listening to him. The wedding photo, with the white dress I had chosen on a hot summer afternoon. I no longer looked at the face of the person beside me. I looked at the light shining on my cheeks. The light that once called me by another name, Hope. A photo with the children, on a short trip to the beach. I remember the waves were high. The children were coughing. I was tired. But in the photo, it was a moment separated from all events. It didn't hold back the cough. It only held back the light from my hand on her shoulder. I used to think that flipping through photos was to remember the past, but no. Memory, if we know how to look at it, does not pull us back. It leads us in. We're into my own self that has never been blurred by time. Every wrinkle I have today does not obscure the light of the past. On the contrary, they are a map showing me where that light went, where it stayed, and in which memory compartment it is waiting for me. Solutio, the stage of dissolution. But before an element can be reformed, it must know what it once was. The pictures are the conductor. They didn't force me to relive the past. They didn't ask me to become the old version. They just said, "This is where you once touched the light. You can still do it, right now. Even though your body's no longer the same." I began a dialogue with memory. No tears, no regrets. Just thanks. Thank you for the times I got lost. Thank you for the times I made the wrong choices. Thank you for the hugs that are no longer there. Because they are the ones that created the sacred space today. Without absence, I would not know how to listen to presence. Without the fragmented photograph, I would not know how beautiful it was to have been present. I closed the drawer, but this time, not to forget, but to keep the light in the picture alive in me. Not through the form, but through the look, through the soft breathing, through the way I sit, no longer rushed. I didn't find myself. I realized I had never been anywhere. Each person in the photo is a version of me who has loved, who has been wrong, who has forgiven, and who has left behind the most important thing. On one way back, I don't keep photos to forget the past. I keep them as maps, leading me back to myself, where I am no longer anyone in them, but touch all the most real things in the life I have lived. There are days when I turn on the TV in the morning, not because the show is good, not because the content is relevant, just because it's so quiet. I turned on the sound, didn't watch the video. Let the sound cover the walls like a thin blanket over the cold loneliness. I'm not the only one. I know there are millions of homes filled with fake laughter from sitcoms or meaningless rebuttals on political television. Not everyone is lonely. But when lonely, people choose sounds that do not require a response. TV doesn't need us to answer. YouTube doesn't force us to talk. The fake bird on the phone keeps chirping no matter how sad we are. Fulcanelli never wrote about TV. He lived before the age of cinema and social media. But in a strangely magical passage, He writes, before the true light appears, the room will be filled with smoke. Before the true voice is heard, we will swim in echoes. I believe the echoes you speak of are the false noises we paste over our emptiness to make us feel less left out. Have you ever turned on the TV and 2 hours later had no idea what you were watching? Have you ever left YouTube on during a meal and had no idea what you were listening to? It's not unconscious. It's a longing for a human voice that no one else can call upon. Solutio, the stage of dissolution, is not just about water. It is the moment when we let the voice of others fill the space where we dare not listen. At first, I blamed myself. Why didn't I turn off the TV? Why couldn't I just sit in silence? But then, I understood I wasn't ready for the truth. The truth was too big, too raw, too quiet. There is a kind of silence as thick as mud, as dark as a moonless night. There, the soul will be forced to reveal itself. No one to shield me, no sound to hide behind. Just me facing myself. And if that's not enough, people turn on the TV, turn on the music, turn on the podcast, turn on anything to avoid touching the sacred silence zone. I slowly learned not to blame myself. I let the false voices ring without judgment. Because I know this is just the outer shell. One day, while the TV was on, I suddenly turned off the sound. Not because the content was boring, but because I felt it was time to listen. The silence was not as scary as before. It is no longer a proof of loneliness. It is a precursor to something real coming. I heard the clock on the wall ticking steadily, the rustling of leaves outside the window, the beating of my heart, irregular but real. Fulcanelli said in A True Furnace, no fire is needed. All that is needed is a space quiet enough to hear the elements call their names. I let the TV go. I let myself not fight the silence anymore. I sat, not meditating, not praying, just sitting and listening to what I feared most, the emptiness of myself. And in that emptiness, I no longer see myself as a victim. I see myself as a practitioner, practicing air, practicing sound, practicing the fragile light falling through the crack of the door into the meaning of life. It was the false noise that saved me from instant collapse. But it was the silence that saved me from losing my soul. One night, I forgot to turn on the light. Not because of a power outage, not because I forgot to do it, but because I wanted to try living in the dark. No artificial light, no soft nightlight, no screen reflecting my face onto the ceiling. Just me and the silent blackness of space. At first, I felt strange. My heart was beating faster than usual, as if the darkness were a real creature, and I had accidentally opened the door for it to enter. I sat, didn't turn on anything, didn't calm myself down, didn't recite Buddha's name, just silence. Every sound became terrifyingly clear, the ticking of the clock, the churning of the guts, the creaking of the floor in the night wind, and most of all, a sound I couldn't name, an indistinct tone, like a knocking from inside me. Not my heart, not my thoughts, but my soul, asking, what now? We only have each other. What will you do? I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because for the first time, I didn't need to say anything. Fulcanelli once wrote, in a passage that few people noticed in The Real Furnace, there is no light, For the metal must learn to reveal its true nature in absolute darkness. That night, I was metal. No one to look at, no role to play, no light to reflect, no face to hold. I began to melt into stillness. No pain, no fear, just soft. Soft as wax. Soft as someone who had cried enough. Soft as someone who no longer needed to hide. I touched my pillow. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. Just like I couldn't see myself, but I knew I was still there. That's the strangest thing about darkness. It doesn't make you disappear. It just brings you back to a sense of formless existence. You are no longer Mrs. X. No longer someone's mother, no longer the owner of this room. You are just a very small point of light, hidden in a space that needs no description. I remember when I was a child, I was so afraid of the dark that I slept with the light on every night. I thought that only when I could see things clearly would I feel secure. But the older I get, the more I understand. There are things that can only be seen when you close your eyes. Close your eyes, and you begin to see inside. Not through pictures, not through mirrors, but through a soundless layer. I call it the breathing of the soul. It doesn't ring like music. It doesn't sound clear like a human voice, but it calms my heart. I don't know if you'll believe it or not, but I once heard the voice of a deceased loved one in the quiet of the night. Not a real voice, not a whisper, but a breath that just touched my throat as I cried in the dark. No words, but I know they are there. For only in the deepest darkness can I be still enough to listen to those who are no longer here in body. Darkness is not the end. It is the pause before a new melody begins. Solutio is not just water, it is shadow. It is formless. It is nameless. It is the stage when everything is separated from its boundaries and prepared for reshaping. I learned to sit in the dark every night. First 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. No meditation, no goal, just sitting and listening. I call it the ritual of peace, where I don't need anyone to validate my existence, where I reconnect with my original self before I was someone in someone else's life. I used to run from the darkness as if it were an enemy. Now I invite it to sit with me as an old friend, silent, but more real than anyone I've ever known. Every morning, before doing anything, I wash my hands, not because of dirt, not because of hygiene, but because I needed a starting point. Start your day, not with work, not with the phone, not with human voice, but with hands. 2 hands. Once tools of love, of holding, and also of letting go. In the past, I washed my hands as a reflex. After cooking, after changing diapers, after coming home from the market. But now, I live alone. No one to serve. No more urgent matters. No more dishes to fill the sink. My hands have nothing left to do. No one to hold. No one to touch. No one waiting for a stroke of hair or a bowl of hot porridge in the middle of the night. And I started washing my hands like a ritual. It's no longer physical hygiene. It's symbolic cleansing. I remember Fulcanelli once said, "The true alchemist does not begin with the furnace. He begins with a hand. For the hand bears the marks of time, and only when the hand is purified can he touch the new element." I don't have a furnace. I don't mix chemicals. But I do have a small faucet. I turn the tap on very gently. Not hard, not rushed, because I don't need speed. I need time to settle. The water flows. My hands catch it. I rub my palms, not to clean, but to feel. I still feel warm. I still vibrate. I still have a layer of living skin, even though it has been through many times of calluses. Washing my hands, for me, became a greeting to myself, to the world. No one sees, no one needs, but I need. I need to know I exist, not through a role, not through someone else's eyes, but through the sound of water pouring over my hands, like a holy baptism. One time, I looked at my hands for a long time. The thin joints, the lines were no longer clear. The age spots were like a map. I don't feel bad. I feel real. Because in alchemy, everything must go to its raw essence before being reformed. My hands now are raw metal. No paint, no perfume, no jewelry, just hands, washed with presence. After washing my hands, I dry them with an old cloth towel. I don't use a dryer. I don't rub them hard. I stroked gently, as if I were wiping a child. And in that moment, I knew I had just been born again. No need for anyone to hold you. No need for certification. No need for paperwork. Just two freshly washed hands. I sat down after that ritual. Did nothing. Just sat. And felt a little clearer than yesterday. Solutio does not end with a breakup. It ends when the broken person begins to feel themselves again in the small things. No need for a big ceremony. Just washing your hands, not to erase the past, but to make way for the new self. I used to think my hands had run out of things to do. But then I realized every morning when I wash my hands, I touch a different version of myself. Clean, calm, and ready for a day when no one will see me, but I am more alive than ever. I used to think that this room was where I was left. 4 walls, a chair, a yellow light bulb. All as evidence that old age is a stage of being withdrawn from life. But one afternoon, as the last rays of the day shone through the window, I saw dust floating in the light. Not bad, not dirty, just present. And then I realized I was living in a sacred space. Not a church, not a monastery, just my own room, and the awakening that had just come through. Fulcanelli once called the ancient churches the stone temples of the alchemist's soul. Not because they were more sacred than any other place, but because the person who entered them knew how to see with the inner eye. I started looking at my room with those eyes. I no longer see the moldy walls. I see the surface that once held the warmth of years of living. I no longer see the empty desk. I see the place where I used to write, cry, wash my hands every morning. I no longer see the narrow window. I see the picture frame of light, where every day there is a symphony of light, darkness, wind, and dust. I began to put my hand on the wall, not to feel the moisture, but as if touching an old being, one that had seen me grow. I disintegrate, and I gradually reemerge. I call this room the lost room, not because it's special, but because I chose it to be special. Solutio, the stage of dissolution, does not always take place in water or darkness. Sometimes it takes place on old tiles, while light slants across the floor, and your soul sits still, doing nothing, but ascending. I put a cloth on the table, not to spread it, but to remember this place is an altar, not to anyone, but to the light in me. I don't display a Buddha statue. No incense, just a dry branch, a cup of water, and my hands, just washed this morning, placed on the edge of the table, like someone greeting the ceremony with the air. The room was nothing new, but I was no longer the same person. I walked step by step in the small space, as if I were walking in a stone temple. Every object in the room was a keeper of memories. The chair once heard me cry. The old clock used to count the seconds I couldn't sleep. The closet used to contain things that were no longer needed, but not brave enough to throw away. Now, everything is quiet, but not meaningless. They stood still as if in an unannounced ceremony. Some people need a large space to meditate. I need a square meter to sit in. Some people need bells, need soft light. I need the shadow of an old lamp and the soft breathing in the small room. Solutio, if done right, will not let you fall apart. It will take you into the most sacred center of your living space, where you no longer need to hide, but begin to welcome. I don't wait for anyone to come home anymore. Not because I gave up, but because I'm home. Back in the room I once thought was a prison cell. Now it is a space to welcome old souls back, to greet a new day, not bright, but real. I used to live in a lonely room. Now I live in a sacred space. Not because it has changed, but because I have looked with alchemical eyes and seen light always waits where we thought there was a darkness. I used to count the days between phone calls. I used to time a text message. I used to wait for the sudden click of the lock on the door and a familiar face to appear. I used to think living alone is temporary. It's a transition. It's a waiting period. But then, months passed, years passed, and what I was waiting for never came. Not because they didn't love me, not because they deliberately forgot. It's just that life just kept going without waiting. And I was still standing there on the threshold of an imaginary door that no longer opened. Fulcanelli once wrote, "The alchemist only truly begins when he stops waiting for the fire outside and starts building the fire within himself." I understand that after so many seasons of waiting, one morning, I woke up and realized today there was no one for me to wait for. No calls, no visits, no letters, no belated birthday cards, nothing. Just me and a void that no longer ached, just soft. And I thought maybe I start waiting for myself, not to get better, not to get young again, not to do anything meaningful. Just wait for the real version of yourself. For once, to appear, sit down, not play a role. I start the morning without looking at the clock. No asking, did you call this time last year? No counting, when was the last time an old friend stopped by? I made tea for someone who hadn't arrived yet and realized it was me. I leave an empty seat for no one to sit on, but for my soul to sit on. I opened my notebook and wrote a few lines, nothing to rave about. Just hello. The self I have never met enough. I will not rush you to appear today. I will just wait. And in that undemanding waiting, I began to see something very real was coming towards me. Step by step, breath by breath. No noise, no show. Just a feeling I'm coming back to myself through every unhurried movement. Solutio, The solution of alchemy ends not in dissolution, but in sedimentation, and in that quiet bottom layer, a new form began to emerge, not created by others, not given by time, but by myself, from the pieces I once forgot. Like after a rain, the water collects in puddles, and in the puddles is reflected a sky that has never been lost. You just haven't been still enough to see it. I sat still. I didn't expect anyone to call. I didn't expect the doorbell to ring. I just waiting for myself to be soft enough and deep enough to appear in the silence, like quiet light on old bricks. I am not lonely anymore, because I am not looking for someone to fill me. I am not empty anymore, because I am not forcing myself to be full. I'm just real, and that very truth is reshaping a person who was once broken, now gathering himself together, not to fight, but to quietly bloom. I stopped waiting for someone to return, to learn how to welcome myself through the solutio season, and to sit back in my chair as an element slowly settling down before entering a new form. One morning, I was sitting in my old chair, hands on my knees, doing nothing, thinking nothing. And suddenly, light flooded in, not from the window, not from the light, but from inside my chest, a warm feeling for no apparent reason. A light, effortless breath. A very thin thought. I'm still here. I'm enough. No victory. No breakthrough. Just a sad and gentle light. Unnamed. Unexplained. Just present. Fulcanelli ended his final manuscript with a little notice sentence. Rubedo does not come from outside. It is not the color of fire. It is the red that rises from the veins of the soul after suffering enough disintegration without running away. I understand that sentence with my own body, not through books, not through theory, but through real life when you are no longer panicking because of loneliness. I'm no longer afraid of the night. No longer have the TV on in the background. No longer let noise fill the silence. I learned that loneliness doesn't kill me. Loneliness is where I start to live truly. I looked into the mirror without turning back. I saw a person who was no longer young, no longer playing a role, no longer expecting anyone to understand. Just there, like the light there. Rubedo, the red stage, is not a bright light. It is the glow of a settled furnace ember. It is not bright, but it is not extinguished. It lives quietly in every little action, making a cup of tea, folding a towel, smoothing the blanket, opening the window at 5 a.m. without waiting for anyone to pass by. I don't want anything more, not because I don't want anything anymore, but because everything I need is already in the saddle. Life did not come from somewhere. It sprouted within me, on land that had been broken, abandoned, and considered nothing. I am the soil. I am the seed. I am also the sower. And I am the witness to the seed sprouting in silence. No one praised. No one saw. No one called. But the red light still shone, like a ritual that needed no one to declare. I no longer need a miracle, because I am a miracle that has no particular form. It is just, there is a person who has gone through a journey of melting and stands back, more intact than when he started. I want to tell you, if you are also sitting in a silent room, that light is still real, not from the light bulb, not from the ringing of the phone, but from the very breath you are breathing, in the presence you are holding. I used to think I was the one left behind. Now I know I was the one left behind, to welcome a soul that had just returned. My own soul. Rubedo is like that. Not flashy, not going to make you cry. It just makes you smile a little, like someone remembering who they are. I thought this room was a tomb. It turned out to be a crypt. I thought I was waiting for something outside. It turned out the light I was looking for had been here since day one. I just wasn't quiet enough to see it.